let's talk a little bit about disinformation and how to combat disinformation while respecting the freedom of expression. And I'm going to talk a little bit about the role of fact-checking when combating disinformation. So what is disinformation? Disinformation is essentially false information that is deliberately shared with the intention of causing harm to individuals. So there are several elements of disinformation, and the first obvious element is that it's false information. The second being that it is deliberately shared, and the third that it somehow causes harm, has the real potential to cause harm. So disinformation can actually be subcategorized according to the severity of the harm that it causes. And there are certain types of disinformation that are very harmful. For example, disinformation that results in the advocacy of hatred towards a particular community and incites others to commit acts of violence against that community. So that kind of disinformation is very serious and causes serious harm and is prohibited by Sri Lanka's law, namely the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, Section 3. Then you also have disinformation that can cause serious public alarm and a sense of panic. And we consider such disinformation, particularly during times of crisis, to be severe enough for there to be some form of criminal sanctions. So for example, under Sri Lanka's law, the police ordinance has criminalized that type of disinformation, right? Disinformation that could really cause public alarm. So leaving aside the most extreme forms of disinformation which cause really serious harm, there are types of disinformation that causes harm because that's by definition the nature of disinformation, but harm that doesn't rise to a level of severity that warrants criminal sanctions. So for example, you can take election campaigns. During election campaigns, candidates and their campaign teams may share information that isn't truthful. And there could be genuine harm that ensues from that disinformation because voters could be misled and voters might vote for candidates according to information that isn't quite true. So there's still harm there, but the level of harm may not warrant criminal sanctions. Criminal sanctions in those contexts might be considered disproportionate and a restriction on freedom of expression that is impermissible under our constitution. So that is where fact-checking becomes very important, because fact-checking is an alternative means or method through which disinformation can be contested and combated without going through the very severe sanctions of criminal sanctions. And fact-checking can play a role in maintaining information integrity, resisting disinformation, and ensuring that people act according to information that is verifiable and accurate. So this is where fact-checking is so important. Fact-checking, in order to be successful, has two elements. One is that the fact-checker or the institution that engages in fact-checking needs to be independent. Why do I say that? Independent fact-checking is the only means through which we can really ensure that those who are doing the verification, that is where the information is assessed as to whether it's accurate or inaccurate, those individuals should not have vested interests or conflict of interest in terms of the person or entity that is actually stating the true or false fact or information. So it's really important that those who assess information and categorize it as either false or true should be impartial and not have a vested interest. So that's the first important part of fact-checking. The second is that the process should be rigorous, which means that it's not always easy to identify information as being either truthful or false. And the process through which that assessment is done should be a rigorous process. So then people will have confidence in the fact-checking process and then come to a realization as to whether this information is true or false. So fact-checking to be successful and effective needs to be independent and needs to be rigorous. And through that process, disinformation that doesn't come to that threshold, meet that threshold of being severely harmful, where criminal sanctions are warranted, that type of disinformation can be contested and resisted through alternative means like fact-checking. So fact-checking is a really important activity in a context where there's a lot of disinformation. And in Sri Lanka, where we have gone through crisis after crisis, starting with the armed conflict, then in the aftermath of the armed conflict, we had a lot of anti-minority violence, then we had the COVID pandemic, and now we're in economic crisis. In these crises, maintaining information integrity, where citizens can act, can make decisions according to accurate information, is really important. And disinformation can really disrupt that process. So fact-checking is essential to dealing with crises. It's essential to maintaining democracy, and it's certainly essential to ensuring that we don't take a really severe approach to all forms of disinformation. We maintain our balance, ensure freedom of expression, but still pursue information integrity. So fact-checking is really important, but there are some challenges associated with fact-checking. One of the major challenges is reach. How do we ensure that disinformation that has a really viral effect or viral quality that spreads very fast, how do we ensure that that kind of disinformation is combated through fact-checking, when sometimes the checked fact or the corrected fact is not as viral or doesn't spread as fast as the original disinformation? So that's one of the major challenges that fact-checking institutions constantly are confronted with. Ultimately, there is a viral quality to harmful information that is not always present when the counter message, counter narrative is introduced. And the major challenge today is finding ways in which individuals who are susceptible and vulnerable to disinformation are also given access to the counter message, the fact check. And cracking that problem is probably the largest challenge that fact checkers face.